Did you know last season that 8 of the 10 wide receivers in ADP finished in the top 10 in points per game in PPR? Believe it or not, folks, we nailed it last year in ADP. So, of the 10 wide receivers last year, only Mike Evans and one other receiver did not meet the top 10. And on today's show, we're going to discuss the top 10 wide receivers currently in ADP and some buys, guys that we love, sells, maybe a player or two that are not going to be top 10 next year, and a sleeper, a player currently going outside the top 10 that we would think should be going in the top 10 for fantasy football. Before we do, make sure you follow us across the board at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. And of course, make sure you jump over to Razzball.com and check out all the great articles that you need to win your fantasy team. But today's show is the top 10 wide receivers in ADP, starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And to break down the ADP, we have brought in Keelin Billue, our resident wide receiver expert. What's going on, Keelin?
Yeah. Not much, Bobby. What's up with you?
Yeah, nothing much. Actually, myself, I apologize. I literally had my notes up about the 10 players. I remembered Mike Evans. It's one other guy, and now I'm blanking on who that person was. But there was 2 wide receivers last year that were drafted in the top 10 that didn't make it into the top 10. I want to say it was I'm not even going to guess. At some point in the show, I'm randomly going to bring it back in and find that note that I wrote down. But anyway, today's show is really important to break down the top 10 wide receivers currently in ADP. So we looked at NFC ADP. We also looked at best ball 10s and underdog fantasy football because those are a lot of the leagues that are out there right now. And before we dive into all this stuff, Keelin, I wanted to talk quickly about who is currently going in the top 10. I think that would be important, right? To know who's currently going in the top 10. It starts at the top, Justin Jefferson, nothing surprising there. Marr Chase at 2, Tyreek Hill at 3, Cooper Kupp at 4, Stefon Diggs at 5, Davante Adams at 6, CeeDee Lamb at 7, A.J. Brown at 8, Amon-Ra St. Brown at 9, and Garrett Wilson at 10, already getting that Aaron Rodgers bump. So we're going to dive into some of our ADP buys first. So which one of these top 10 guys do you love and you're all in on for 2023?
Yes. So my buy, Bobby, I think I told you I felt like this was both the easiest and most difficult challenge you've sent me because all of these guys are awesome. However, I kind of waffled between Cooper Kupp and Marr Chase. I ended up choosing Marr Chase. And honestly, I think a lot of that has to do with last season. I can understand, people are probably a little afraid of his health. He did get injured and he was out, I believe, 5 games. But despite being out 5 games, he still had 87 receptions and had 134 targets. And even despite being out those 5 games, he still did better than his 2021 season. So I think that alone speaks to his development into his second stat for him was that with those 2 seasons, he's only one of 5 players in NFL history that have 2,500 receiving yards in his first 2 seasons. So I'm like, yes, I will have some of that. So, obviously the injury here is a big factor and maybe why you wouldn't consider him. I feel a little better about him just because of how the Bengals are kind of shifting with their offense and improving it. And honestly, Joe Burrow seems to be a pretty good leader for all of them. So I feel like, it's going to be mostly positive from here, barring any serious injury. So, yeah, that is my buy, Marr Chase.
I loved Marr Chase last year. Me and DT loved him. And the injury kind of, I think, stopped the growth. And I think this year you're dead on. This guy is a buy 100%. My guy is actually Cooper Kupp. Okay, so I understand the Rams were an absolute disaster last year. I totally get it. Honestly, Stafford gets hurt. Cooper Kupp gets hurt. And one of the things we always talk about for fantasy football is avoid injured players going into the season, right? And I've said this a bunch of times, but I want to just calm everybody's nerves a little bit on this. Cooper Kupp last year had a high ankle sprain, okay? He didn't tear his ACL. He didn't tear his Achilles. He didn't break a leg. He had a high ankle sprain. And by the time he was ready to come back, the season was over for the Rams. No Matthew Stafford. There was no reason to bring this guy back. So this is his injury heading into this season is essentially a non-factor. Now, I want to talk quickly about Cooper Kupp's 2022 season before we get into it. So heading out of the 2022 season, heading into last year, he was the number 1 player in fantasy football, dominant, averaged 25 PPR points per game. Okay. So this year he slips. Now he's the wide receiver 4, going outside the top 5 in ADP right now, overall ADP. You know what he averaged before his injury in the 9th game of the season? Keelin, you want to take a wild guess what his PPR points per game was weeks 1 through 8?
Before his injury?
Before he went down in week 10, the 9th game, the first 8 games of the season. What was his points per game last year in PPR?
Oh man, I have no idea. I don't
25.
That's insane.
25.
That is
25.
Insane. I wouldn't believe that.
It's the same.
I wouldn't believe that.
Exactly. When I was going through this process, I was like, all right, Cooper Kupp, he's pretty good. He did really good 2 years ago. I thought there was issues with Matthew Stafford, all these problems with the offensive line. I'm like, yeah, well, I wonder where Cooper Kupp finished because his points per game drops. In the last game he played, okay, he had minus yardage and like 2 catches, and he got hurt in that game, and it dropped his points per game from 25 down to like 21 and change, right? So now it looks like he really didn't have that dominant of a season. Well, he did. And by the way, his points per game is 3 more than Justin Jefferson is. So he is way, way above everybody. So he is 100% a buy. But we talked about lessons learned last year about some of the things you can look at for players and things that stand out when you find a bust in fantasy football. The first thing is, were they injured? We just covered he's not. The second thing is QB ADP. You want to have a player attached to a good quarterback. Stafford this season is not in the top 10. He's actually QB 22. So that's not going to work for fantasy football. But I think that has a lot to do with more NFL issues with the skill position group, not Matthew Stafford as a player. So I call it a loophole. The next thing is, there any changes? Was there scheme changes? Was there a new play caller? And then also talking about surrounding talent. Well, there wasn't any change. You still got Sean McVay there. You still got Matthew Stafford pulling the trigger. And if anything, the surrounding talent around Cooper Kupp drives up his stock because they got rid of Allen Robinson and didn't replace him with anybody. A 5th-round pick. So his target competition is even worse than it was last year because now you have no Allen Robinson. So you got to love Cooper Kupp's outlook this season. He's going to continue to get elite targets. He continues to dominate on a per game basis. And I've considered drafting him at 101, but I might be drafting. We'll talk about running backs later, but I might be going a different direction there. I'll save that as a tease. So let's jump down to ADP sells. Keelin, who do you guys your sell?
Again, you gave me a very difficult assignment. Like, how do I choose who's a sell in the top 10? So I went really conservative. For a dynasty league, this would be a buy. But anything else, I personally don't feel like, if given all these guys, I probably wouldn't choose Garrett Wilson. He is going to be better with Aaron Rodgers, unless Aaron Rodgers explodes or something like that. But, I think for me, it's still sort of uncertain what that effect will do. Obviously, I wouldn't be upset if I had him. But, he's just kind of, like I said, still unproven, kind of just like a lower, even though he's in the top 10, he's still just like a little lower than the rest of these guys in terms of like a gap kind of. But I mean, yeah, even with the explosion that he had to go through last season with quarterbacks, I think, yeah, he had the 6th most targets in the NFL. And I thought this was really interesting. So he also had the most unrealized air yards because of that QB problem. But still, he had sort of these like higher level records. So I'm pretty excited to see what he does, but I'm also like a little terrified just because we don't know how it's going to go and unknowns spook me a little. But I have no doubt he'll still do better, but I just don't think he wouldn't be my first pick for these leagues that maybe aren't a dynasty league.
Unrealized air yards is a Razzball favorite stat. Me and Sky brought that up last year like 1,000 times. Look at that. Sky rubbed off on you. You went one show together and bam, look at that. Great stat.
It is a great stat. Yeah, it is because it's like, I don't know. It's like, is this their problem that they're not performing, or is this a quarterback problem? I think we already knew it was a quarterback problem, but I think that just goes to show how bad it was, and it was bad.
We just got to jump in a couple things. One thing, Jamie, blowing up the chat. We appreciate it always for joining the show. I just want to tell you something really quick. So one of the things that we're talking about today, and I brought this up in the chat, is this ADP or rankings. This is ADP currently going on. So NFC ADP, best ball 10s, and underdog fantasy. We could blended those together to get us a consensus ADP. we are going to have all off season long. We're going to have our ADP tracker, our tool that we have on Razzball, which basically compiles all the websites. So we're talking ADP right now. I'm dropping my top 100 flex players probably some point this week. DT's dropping his rankings, so we'll have rankings to go along with these shows. But today is ADP as well. So that's a great, great question. Cooper Kupp was the number 1 wide receiver fantasy points per game. Jamie gets it. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm saying, people. Trust me, you're going to want him. Anyway, let's jump into an ADP sell. All right, and Keelin, you nailed it on the head when you said this is a hard task because last year, 80% of the top 10 wide receivers at ADP, guess what? They finished as top 10 players in PPR points per game. So this is a very tough task. Yes, it's absurd. And by the way, I found that, did I tell you the second player yet? Deebo Samuel. It was Deebo Samuel and Mike Evans were the only 2 that finished outside the top 10 in points per game last year. But anyway, I digress. So with CeeDee Lamb, I brought up the big core 4 things that I like to look at. I like to look at injuries. There's nothing for CeeDee Lamb. Coaching changes. There's a big one. You're moving from Kellen Moore as the OC and play caller to Brian Schottenheimer. Now, this is a completely different philosophy. Brian Schottenheimer comes from the Rex Ryan, like, we're going to run the football down your throat, Jets. And then he was under Jeff Fisher and the St. Louis Rams back in the day. Another just... You don't think airing it out with these guys, right? And then even with his time in Seattle, the 3 seasons he was OC, DK Metcalf did have a top 10 season 1 year. The other 2 years, on a PPR points per game basis, Tyler Lockett was outside the top 20. So there isn't a lot of examples of where Brian Schottenheimer produced a top 10 wide receiver in PPR points per game. So that's where I kind of took myself back and said, all right, there might be more to this than I thought because number one, now on top of this change, yes, he does have a good quarterback. Dak Prescott is the QB 10, which is actually kind of right on the border of our metric of guys you want to actually draft based on their quarterback ADP. But the talent around him did improve, okay? So yes, Dalton Schultz has been swapped out, but we did see last year that even when Dalton Schultz didn't play, Dak still targeted the backup tight ends, and they drafted a kid in the 2nd round as well. So there's more tight end talent going to replace Dalton Schultz, but it's the receivers around him. Got Brandon Cooks now there, which is better than anything he had next to him just last year. And then Michael Gallup would be another year removed. We talk about this all the time. You cannot judge Michael Gallup coming off a serious knee injury last season. You're going to expect him to improve and probably demand more targets this season. So there's going to be a lot more target competition for CeeDee Lamb than there was to last year. But finally, we've seen CeeDee Lamb kind of play that co-star role before when he was with Amari Cooper. And so in 2021, when he was playing with Amari Cooper, he was the wide receiver 23 in PPR points per game. So I love CeeDee Lamb. I just think that the improved talent around him, the change in the coaching staff, I think that he might be more of a high-end wide receiver 2 this season on a per-game basis. All right, Keel, let's do the last one, the ADP sleeper. Currently a player going outside the top 10 in ADP for wide receivers that you think should be in the top 10.
Yeah, so I almost don't even know if he should be there yet, but I look forward to him getting closer to there because I think there's potential for him to be there. But my pick was Chris Olave from the Saints. And I believe he's ADP 14 for wide receivers. So honestly, like looking at him last season, like he had an incredible rookie season, dealing with, this kind of, as we talked about, the carousel of quarterbacks who were mid at best. He had Andy Dalton kind of as his best option. And I don't know that I would call Derek Carr an upgrade. I would say maybe, his leadership skills might be a little better. But I think, one thing will benefit Chris Olave with that change, and that is Derek Carr's deep passing. I think that will help Chris Olave kind of boost him a little bit. And then just in general, I mean, coming off that rookie season, like you were mentioning earlier about with injuries, like I'm only going to expect him to improve. Maybe not Marr Chase, obviously, but like the same kind of track where this first season was amazing. Second season, I think it's only going to get better from there. So yeah, I think, not even necessarily the conditions around him have improved that much, though I would say they've improved. But I do think just what he's shown so far, I have a lot of hope for that and where that's going to go.
I'll say it for you, Keelan. Derek Carr is an upgrade. All right. So I 100% agree. I agree with this one a lot. This is a good call. Honestly, Jamie's got your back too. She already called it out that Olave scored more fantasy points per game than Wilson just last year.
Yes.
So there
I
you
think
go.
it was like, I know it was like for the receptions, it was like 13.2 to 12.2. So yeah, definitely that is a good sign. And yes, I feel like I don't want to go on an Andy Dalton defense, but I don't think he wasn't as terrible as we think. But still, I feel more comfortable with Derek Carr, and yeah, I think he's, I think it'll just be at least a little bit more, if anything, a little more consistent. Sort of.
All right. I agree. 100%. This is a good call. I think the Mike Thomas thing coming back could introduce some target competition issues for Chris Olave, but I think the improvement in quarterback will show. And plus, we don't know what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara yet. Is he going to get suspended? What's the deal with that? So this is a good call. I like this one a lot. I struggled with this hard.
Yeah, it was tough.
I literally was sitting. So at first, here's the names I kind of ran through. I'll give you a list of players before I arrived at my player, which is T. Higgins. Jerry Jeudy. Okay. I'm thinking to myself, all right, okay, Jerry Jeudy got Sean Payton there now. Russell Wilson could probably bounce back. But then I'm like, he's got Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton to compete with targets. Not sure I really care for that one. Keenan Allen, another player. By the way, if you look at Keenan Allen when he was healthy last year, he was dominant. This team is moving to a new OC. They did draft a kid in the first round, but Keenan Allen's another name. Calvin Ridley is another name that popped up for me. I love him. It's like the Stefon Diggs when he got traded to Josh Allen. You're giving him Trevor Lawrence now, who's like is going to be the next the next Patrick Mahomes-esque type quarterback. You got to love Calvin Ridley's talent, but he's got a bunch of competition for targets. It's a lot. Then it was DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper. The one I almost landed on was DeAndre Hopkins, but Kyler Murray's injury kind of scared me off, plus the change in OC, and I landed at T. Higgins. Now, T. Higgins, I guess I'm not as sold as I was. Unfortunately, I committed via text to you, and I was like, all right, I'm going to do T. Higgins. I think this is going to be good. And then I realized, oh, crap, Jamar Chase missed time last year. So what are the splits with that? And then I started saying, oh, crap, maybe this isn't a good call. But you know what? I'll stick with it. All right. So
I did the same thing, if it makes you feel better.
No, it's so bad. It was so bad. But anyway, when I was looking at T. Higgins last year, first of all, he checks the box. There's no major injury coming out. He did miss time last year, but he's not coming off a major injury. His quarterback is elite. I think Joe Burrow, outside of like Patrick Mahomes, I think Joe Burrow might be the best pure quarterback right now. I love the guy. Yeah. QB4 at ADP right now. The talent, they're swapping out tight ends, technically with Hayden Hurst and Irv Smith, but Irv Smith doesn't scare you. He hasn't stayed healthy. They did lose Samaje Perine. I don't know what that means from a pass catching perspective. Does Joe Mixon take over that role? Do they find another player like Williams to take over that role? Or does it impact the wide receivers? Do they get more looks now? Because there isn't a really good third down back in this offense. So, okay, nothing crazy there. But really what got me excited about T. Higgins was he did have kind of an up and down season staying healthy. He only played 50% of snaps in 13 games. If you look at those games, he averaged 16.6 PPR points per game. That would have been wide receiver 11 last year for anybody that played 4 or more games. If you jump up to 75%, he only played 11 games of 75% of snaps. His points per game jumps to 17.2. That would have been wide receiver 9. And I was like, okay, here we go. Wide receiver 9, I found my guy. And then I was like, crap, wait. Jamar Chase missed time. So with Jamar Chase last year, he averaged 15.9 PPR points per game, which is still really good. Would have been wide receiver 12. Not bad, but it's still not top 10. But I do think that there is an opportunity for the Cincinnati Bengals to finally let Joe Burrow do what Patrick Mahomes does. Just go win and lose football games on the back of Joe Burrow every single time.
Yes.
And if they can get the pass volume up a notch or two, closer to even we saw what Kirk Cousins last year did with Kevin O'Connell, that kind of jump in pass volume.
Yep.
I think there's a real shot that he could be a top 10 receiver, even with Jamar Chase on the field. Keelin, before we close the show, any final thoughts about our top 10?
Yeah, no, I think you pointed out something really good with Joe Burrow. I mean, like I said, I feel like he's been a great leader. He's really put their offensive line into shape. And so I feel like, it'd be possible for both of us to win here with our sleeper and our bye.
Yes, we need it all to happen. So that's it, folks. That's all we got today. This is our top 10 ADP wide receiver review. On today's show, we broke down the top 10 receivers currently going at ADP. If you need another rundown, it's Justin Jefferson, Marr Chase, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Diggs, Adams, Lamb, Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Garrett Wilson breaks down the top 10. Let us know your comments. Do you have a buy in that top 10? Do you have a sell? Do you have a sleeper that we didn't cover on today's show that you think will be in the top 10? Make sure you to like, subscribe, follow us across the board. Keelin, tell the people where they can find you and your upcoming content at Razzball or wherever are you right now.
Yeah. So right now I am working with Razzball Baseball, doing the fantasy injury report. It comes out every Saturday morning. So get your Saturday morning reading on if you're into baseball. And you can find me on Twitter at KEELIN_12FT.
There we go. And once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. You follow me at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter. Jamie, thank you for joining. Great show. Great follower. Great comments. We appreciate you.
Yes.
Once again, this is the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. We are out of here, folks.